I rise today in support of Senate Bill 88. And I think it's important that we review a little bit of discussion about some of the points brought up today so that folks at home can better understand what it is that we're talking about. The problem that we're seeking to face as a state is a recruitment and retention issue that we have had as a state long before there was a workforce shortage that developed because of COVID, long before workforce issues happened in more recent years. We have had a retention and recruitment issue in the state of Alaska for quite a while, going back more than a decade. There are different ideas about how to solve that problem. One, which we have before us, Senate Bill 88, may or may not be cost neutral. We heard this bill in my committee, Senate Labor and Commerce, many times. We had many meetings surrounding the effectiveness of this bill, the risk reduction measures that were taken within the bill to make sure that we did not dig a hole as a state to cost the state money in future past service cost. Provisions, as have been spoken to many times, are in this bill to avoid doing just that. The other solution that has been proposed by members of this body is most definitely not cost neutral, Mr. President. Entering into SBS is certainly not cost neutral for those entities, municipalities around the state that would have been mandated to join SBS under an amendment we heard later today. Earlier today. That amendment would have had very significant financial impacts on those municipalities, resulting in higher property taxes or possibly higher sales taxes for those entities. A bill with that idea in it is in my committee, and we'll vet that cost and we'll make it clear to members across the state about what actually the bill is, what is the cost of those ideas. We've heard talk about that the solution needs to be higher salaries, which may or may not be the case. Those also have a bill. They have a fiscal note, definitely not cost neutral, to raise salaries. What we're not doing, what I'm not hearing today in this debate, is what is the difference between that bill to join supplement benefit system, to raise salaries, versus the cost of the proposed defined benefit provision before us. That comparison has not been drawn. We'll vet these ideas and figure out these costs as we explore these ideas later on in this session. I think those costs will be very interesting to look at because once again, we have a provision that is likely cost neutral. A plan, as the Rules Chair pointed out earlier, was vetted over a decade ago that people testified to from the state that said it would save us money. But because of partisan opinions at the time, because of attitudes and old war wounds that people had had just a few short years before that discussion was had, people did not want to adopt a plan that would likely save money. Instead, they plowed on through tomorrows, expecting different results, resulting in the system that we have now. We have a problem. None of us in this room are suggesting doing nothing, but there is a clear difference in cost based on what has been proposed here today. One option is definitely more cash out the door. Most definitely more cash out the door in pay raises and benefit increases that some would like to force on local municipalities. That means taxes right now. That has been proposed today and earlier voted down. The other option will likely save the state money, as has been testified to many times in this building, Mr. President. As a fiscal conservative, the song that keeps running through my mind is a song from the 60s by Betty Lee, Hey Big Spender. I find it interesting that we can have costs wrapped up in fiscal notes that there's some question about, and people wring their hands about, well, we're not sure about this fiscal note. And we have other ideas brought before this body which have no fiscal note attached at all. No notice of potential revenue obligations that people are willing to take votes in this body today to obligate local governments and their taxpayers to. It's very fascinating. Aside from that, and we'll explore those ideas more, I'd like to talk a little bit about debt and past service costs from the old plan, which was pointed out very clearly is not going to be increased by this plan. Booking a debt or a liability as a past service cost for a pension plan and saying that we owe this money would be like a homeowner or a business owner saying that their electrical bill, their gas utility bill, what they spend on gas for their car, all in the future of their working career, that they are booking that cost as debt. The past service cost won't be paid out as a state until all of the retirees that retire under the Tier 1 and 2 system are dead. That's when the money goes out the door. We have a choice as a state. Do we bank up the money to pay that cost now? This would be like in your home. You pay your electrical utility ahead of time. You pay your gas utility ahead of time. You pay your bills ahead of time as a way of investing. Well, if you've listened to Dave Ramsey for more than 2 minutes, you know that that is an awful idea. You need to deal with your liabilities in a much more smart way. We have the ability to do that as a state through investing in our permanent fund earnings reserve and the corpus of the fund to invest that money. Talking about past service costs for a plan that has been long since passed as some kind of scary specter that a layperson listening to this conversation would understand as a mortgage payment or something else, those two ideas don't match up. We'll pay the past service cost off. There's a plan to do that. But the last money goes out the door when the last person dies. And so I think it's important as we talk about past service cost, it's talking about what are our utility bills into the future. You don't pay those ahead and expect to make money on that proposition. You invest the money wisely so that you can pay bills off as they come. That's how I think a regular person would understand this type of idea. We heard about effects on retention. And as was spoken to from the member from Juneau very effectively, there's problems with the graph. What I can tell you in my experience as a teacher for 15 years, looking at a seniority list every year, is that when I hired on, I was at the bottom of the seniority list. The list is was about 18 pages long. Now it's under 14 or so because the teachers laid off, teachers left, reductions in budgets. Well, I've stalled out in moving up pages of that list as I've remained on in the school district because the people that are Tier 1 and Tier 2 employees, they stay. They stay and they work in our district as long as they can. Whereas the people who were hired in 2007 and later, they turn over constantly. It is constant. I see young families move in. They realize, wow, our retirement system is awful. And they leave. And I've heard this year after year after year. It was mentioned by one member that we have a great retirement system currently in the state of Alaska. Mr. President, I can tell you that as someone who has reviewed Monte Carlo analyses that have been passed around this building as far as the successful nature of retirement, especially for teachers, teachers right now in the Tier 3 TERS defined contribution system have a 70% failure rate in their retirement funds. That means that 70% of all teachers in this state will run out of money before they die under the current system. That's unacceptable. That's not a good retirement system. That's not income replacement. That's failure. And the idea that somehow we need to fix this system because people can't manage their money appropriately, that's ludicrous. There's no investment system in the world that could overcome the long odds and the lack of resources put into the retirement system as it exists currently. In fact, when the Tier 3 and Tier 4 system was created, a sweetheart backroom deal was cut with Great West Retirement so that people were automatically put into a plan that charged excess fees and had diminished rate of returns so that the money managers of those accounts could make more money to stand up the system. It's outrageous. Now, there are going to be people that come out against this plan and say, oh, it's going to bankrupt the state. Okay. I want to see the numbers. I want to see the data on that. But I think that when people who are backed by large financial firms who get rich off of selling annuities because people want security in their retirement, selling annuities to folks on a defined contribution plan, it's a bit of a conflict of interest there, Mr. President. And if those groups want to talk about this plan in a way that is dishonest, that is not straight with the Alaskan people, I am happy to engage them in a conversation about the real cost of taking up the alternative, of sending money out the door now that we could save if we provide a responsible retirement through this plan. That's the trade-off. We have a plan before us in Senate Bill 88 that is likely cost neutral. The options are most definitely not, and will result in millions more of state spending. Those are the options that have been presented here today. And those options lead me to make a fiscal responsible choice of voting yes for this bill. Thank you, Mr. President.